Mark Twain said that it's easier to fool people than to convince them that they've been fooled. And so I realize I've got my work cut out for me today because I think a lot of politically active Americans, a lot of activists, have been fooled by the idea that an Article 5 convention to propose amendments to the Constitution is going to bring about a positive change in America. I think at best it'll be a gigantic waste of effort when we should be doing some things that will do some real good, but at worst, it will give the coup de grace to the Republic as we know it. And I'm going to make the historical case that conventions can run away, and I'm going to look at the article itself, the language of the article itself, and compare that with what we know about how our political process works now to make this case to you. Now, really, the pillars of our good government in a republic, and in a republic, the public is responsible for the government. And so if we as a people have lost virtue, we're not going to, in the long run, have good government. And so really, maybe a part of the solution is instead of talking about politics directly, part of it's a spiritual problem. I mean, I would say the biggest part of it is a spiritual problem in the sense that if we as a people have lost our virtue, and we have, not now, not even churches, Religion Incorporated, are big on sin and repentance and the sense that we need to examine ourselves, see if we're doing our neighbor right, see if we're doing our maker right, and change our ways. Now it's all about affirming your vision or your dreams or preaching about how bad those other people are in churches and not how bad we are. And there's no introspection that way, and there's no self-improvement. And part of what I'm going to argue here is we need to change things. It's not that we need to just keep doing what we're doing while the Constitution needs to change, that we're doing just what we need to, and everything else needs to change around us. That it goes beyond that. If you really want to fix things, you've got to start here. Start with yourself. And so that is not a popular message. It is not a message that people want to hear. They want to believe the problem is all elsewhere and none in here. And that is incorrect. It'll always be incorrect because we're human beings. Improvement is a lifelong process. But I think a part of that as it applies to us is, and the other part of that problem, is that we need more choices and real choices. They've got us divided mostly into Team Red and Team Blue, the only two viable choices because of the way they make the selection and election of the candidates, so that you're afraid to change teams because the only other choice is the team you've been taught to despise, and for good reason, no matter which team you're talking about, honestly. And so if there were 10 choices instead of 2, it wouldn't be so traumatic for you to change brands when you thought one of them was corrupt, one of them was sold out to special interest, one of them was not listening to the people. And you could say that about either of them, and you'd be right. And so that's the thing. People have been so tribalized that they're used to rationalizing the actions of their own tribe members and accusing the other tribe just on the drop of a hat. And the idea that their own brand needs to get better, it's some sort of extension of what I said before. It just never occurs to them that they've got to leave their brand because their brand is part of the problem too. And they've rigged that. The guys running the 2 brands have rigged the system. I mean, after all, they don't want to have to pay off 10 sets of people. They'd rather pay off 2 sets of people. And so they've got it to where you have this illusion of choice. Here's the brand that we're just really working to get you identified with, and here's the brand that you think is the devil incarnate. And so is that really, how much choice is that? Seriously. And so thinking beyond that, instead of saying, well, okay, the Constitution needs to change. No, our political system needs to change way before the Constitution does. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm saying that an Article 5 convention would be, in effect, giving today's elites a chance to amend it out of existence. And they will come up with something very likely to be much worse than what we have now. I'm going to start with the history, and then we'll go to the text of the amendment itself and juxtapose that against how politics is done in America today. The people that are pushing Article 5 conventions hold it out as like whatever your hot button is, they say this is the answer. Is term limits your pet issue? Then support Article 5 so we can do term limits. Is the debt your issue? Deficit spending? Support Article 5 so we can do something about that. Do you think the courts are out of control? Support Article 5 and we can do it that way. And so it's almost like each person they're selling it to sees it as the answer on their pet issue. But what the convention actually does cannot be restricted in advance. And I want to make the historical case for that first. The way politics works, not only is the chance the convention will run away not zero, but as a rule, the more power you have at stake in a distant central location, the greater the chances will be that this power will be used in a way that the people who initially started this back home did not agree to or did not anticipate. That's the whole problem of Washington in a nutshell, isn't it? So I like the Constitution we have. I think we got lucky or we got blessed on that one. But a fair look at the historical record will show that the convention which produced our current Constitution was a runaway convention. It exceeded its authority. Okay? So even our founders, decent people that they were, great thinkers that they were, men of integrity that many of them were, the original convention which produced our Constitution itself exceeded its authority. Now, thank goodness, thank heaven that we got the Constitution we've got. Could have been much worse. The caliber of men we had putting it together was very high, but it was a runaway convention. Patrick Henry was one of those who suspected it from the beginning, and when it was over, he said the Federal Convention ought to have amended the old system. For this purpose, they were solely delegated. The object of their mission extended to no other consideration. So Patrick Henry was in effect saying the convention which produced our Constitution, our present Constitution, was a runaway convention. They should have just amended the Constitution at the time, which was the Articles of Confederation. Instead, they wrote a whole new Constitution. Was he right? Well, you don't have to be a constitutional lawyer to figure out whether he was right or not. You just have to be able to understand one sentence of English and be willing to face the truth. The application or the applicable act of the Confederation Congress reads like this. The Convention of Delegates was supposed to meet for the sole purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation and reporting to Congress and the several legislatures such alterations and provisions therein as shall, when agreed to in Congress and confirmed by the states, render the federal Constitution adequate to the exigencies of government and the preservation of the Union. Did you notice that the Call to Convention used the Articles of Confederation and the federal Constitution interchangeably? Because that was the Constitution. And it doesn't say that they were to render a federal Constitution that is adequate, but render the federal Constitution adequate. In other words, the Articles of Confederation. The original Constitution Convention began as an amendments convention which got out of hand and ran away. It wound up writing an entirely new document when they were originally only authorized by the Congress to amend the Articles of Confederation. And if it happens again, folks, we can't count on the people in that room being as noble as the Founding Fathers. James Madison, who he wrote the amendment as a compromise. He wanted any changes to go through Congress because he was a Federalist. In a nod to the Anti-Federalists, he wrote Article 5, but it wasn't really what he wanted to do, and he was afraid of any kind of new convention. whether it be Article 5 or another constitutional convention or what have you. He said, having witnessed the difficulties and dangers experienced by the first convention, which assembled under every propitious circumstance, I should tremble for the result of a second, meeting in the present temper of America. Guys, are we in a better temper now? Is America's going mad. And giving people in that frame of mind a chance to rewrite our most fundamental law is a terrible mistake. If you won't listen to me, listen to the guy who wrote it. He wrote it as a compromise measure. He didn't want people to use it. I'm not saying there are no circumstances under which it should be used, but I'm saying we don't have those circumstances, and that's going to be my next point, is that if you look at the mechanics of the article and the way our political system is currently working, this is the worst time to have an Article 5 convention. Article 5 convention should be done to make it even better when times are good, not as a silver bullet or as a desperation move when things are going badly. It was never meant to work like that. Now, let me move on, and I'm going to have the wording of the amendment up there, and we're going to discuss, because I think I've made my point. It's obvious these conventions can go bad. The people's telling you we have guarantees that they won't go bad. They're selling absolute snake oil. It kind of went bad the first time. We just had people of integrity in the room. You can't count on that happening again. So I have the text of Article 5 there, and I've highlighted a couple of words in red and blue. And in red, it answers this question. Who calls the convention? Who writes that call saying that there's going to be an Article 5 convention? The answer is Congress. It's right there in the amendment. The states simply apply to Congress to call a convention. Congress writes the call. So if you are not happy with the current level of integrity and policy, wherewithal, and wisdom in Congress, then you may not be happy with the call. These people telling you the states will tell Congress what's in the call, they're not reading the thing. It doesn't say that. It says the opposite of that. And the second question is this: who proposes the method of ratification? And the answer, again, look in the blue there. It's Congress. Congress proposes the method of ratification. Now, you might be thinking, well, that just authorizes them to, write a call, a general loose call to convention, and the states will fill in the blanks. Really? Does it say that in the amendment? No, it doesn't say that. The salesmen who are peddling this thing to desperate people who are worried because their country is going off the cliff, so they're selling this as some kind of antidote. In reality, it is a distraction. It is a distraction to keep us from doing the things we should be doing, which is doing everything we can for us and our neighbors becoming better people, which is beyond politics. And number two, insisting that the political system permit us more real choice instead of being tribalized into a club whose actions you rationalize, even when they are also harming the republic. Instead, they're saying, no, don't worry, the two-party system's fine, your favorite club is fine. Don't worry about the fact that they're being funded by global, not even American corporations buying the party you think is yours these days. No, that can't be the answer. The answer is the Constitution just needs to be brushed up. We're fine over here. We just need to change that Constitution. That's what they're telling you. But look at the text of the Article 5. Congress is the one writing the call to the convention. They make a big deal out of it. See, it says Congress shall call a convention. They have to do it. Yeah, they have to do it, but they can also do it the way they want. It doesn't just give them the duty to write the call, it gives them the authority to write the call. Now, a reasonable expectation is that they would perform this duty with the same devotion to self-interest that they performed all their other recent duties. Why would this be the one time they do it differently? You want to change the Constitution because you're dissatisfied with them? Well, they're the ones that write the call to change it. And so you think, oh no, they'll just write a simple call. No, there's nothing in the text of Article 5 which restricts Congress in the drafting of the call to convention in any way. And say, well, okay, what if they go farther than we think they should? We'll sue them. Well, who decides that? The same Supreme Court that doesn't know what marriage is, that doesn't know what a woman is? And when our elites are going insane, it's no time to give them a shot at rewriting the Constitution, folks. Look, the courts wouldn't even have to. They have been willing to overlook the text or misconstrue the text when they did get a desire they want in the past, but the courts wouldn't even have to do that this time. The text does support the claim of federal jurisdiction over the drafting of the call to convention. And what if Congress decides to write it so that there are set-aside delegates for various organizations and interest groups? I mean, you think about it. This will be a lot of power. It will be high stakes, all in one central location in a brief period of time. And they will get rules that once they're made, they'll be hard to get around. And so this will be the fundraising opportunity of the century for both parties. Why would this be the one occasion on which our representative decided to listen to you rather than the special interests that have been funding their campaigns and whining and dining them for all these years? Just think, people. Think about what the words actually say and the reality of how they perform. Don't listen to snake oil. Don't get high on hopium. Use your head. Now, Congress would have every incentive to make carve-outs for delegates in the call. They don't want you grassroots people getting in their business. Both sides would want to give lots of seats to insiders. By the time they were done rewarding their contributors, how many seats would be left for grassroots? Maybe just a few, maybe just enough to give a fig leaf of cover that it was a grassroots thing, or that so that some people would buy in when they really shouldn't. Okay? But you really can't expect good from a convention where most of the delegates are simply picked from among the members of the current ruling class, which is so twisted and ignored our current Constitution. You really can't expect that. You shouldn't expect that. Now, the response to this is, of course, the ratification process. They'll say, well, even if these conventions propose a bunch of bad amendments, they still have to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. All that means, at best, is if we fight hard and if we're smart enough to catch all their tricks, after years of struggle, we could get things back to where they are now. We wouldn't have to worry about anything worse happening. Guys, that's a terrible reason. That, it is not okay to give today's ruling class a chance to rewrite our Constitution with the excuse that, well, if we fight hard, we can stop those changes from happening. It's not an excuse. There's no guarantee you'll win the fight. There's no guarantee the media will tell it straight. There's almost a guarantee they won't. There's no guarantee that those ratification conventions will be what you think they are. It's not okay to give today's insiders a chance to rewrite the Constitution just because you think you can stop their ideas from getting in when they do. At best, you've wasted years that we don't have on something that, if you weren't scared, you'd already know it's not going to work, and that you need to look on other avenues. Now, the Amendments Convention that is called by Congress isn't going to be the one that I want, or the one that you want, or the one that Mark Levin wants. It's going to be the one that Congress wants to call. And federal judges won't even have to make excuses so that their fellow federal government employees have that power. Right? They could just go with the text. And some of you guys are of the opinion that our elections have been rigged. And if we believe it's possible, then why aren't we considering that even the method of ratification for these amendments would be rigged? You think they've rigged the election, but they're going to let this go by without rigging it. Really? I mean, the political establishment, and I'm not talking about just the call to convention, I'm talking about the ratification conventions. You know, if that's possible, if they've rigged the election, why isn't it also possible they would rig those ratification conventions? And what do I mean by that? I mean that Congress stretches its authority to propose the method of ratification. It says right in Article 5 that Congress proposes the method of ratification. So what if instead of just saying, we choose ratification by convention, that they go on to say as part of their proposal that there's this list of requirements for delegates, and the requirements would essentially shut out the grassroots. What's to stop them from doing that? The head of the State Bankers Association, he may not represent your interests, but they're in as a delegate. Black Lives Matter may not represent your interests, even if you're black, they don't, but they're in. Now, personally, I feel like this would be an example of overreach, that Congress was only meant to say what method of ratification would be used and the details left up to each state. Problem is, the text doesn't say that, does it? The text is silent as to how much detail Congress's ratification proposal has in it. And who settles the disputes? If there's a dispute, hey, Congress, you're overreaching. You're writing too much detail into the rules for the ratification process. Oh, well, let's take it to our buddies over in the Supreme Court. You know what? Our buddies in the Supreme Court, fellow federal government employees, have decided we're right and the states are wrong. So, and the text is silent and they're filling in the blanks. Guys, the courts have already shown they can't be trusted. And they're the ones who would decide if there was any dispute on whether or not Congress was exceeding its authority. Now you say, well, the states wouldn't stand for such micromanagement. They would refuse to call a convention, or they'd call another one in defiance of Congress's call with delegates of their own choosing. Really? You think the state Republican Party or Democratic Party would call a constitution in violation of what their brothers and the federal side are doing? That's the problem with these uniparties, these same political outfit electing candidates for state, local, and national office, executive branch and legislative branch. They don't check and balance one another anymore like they should. It's an end run around the fathers' intent. The founding fathers intended our three branches of governments to check and balance one another. They intended the states to check and balance the feds, and the feds to check and balance the states. They didn't trust any human being with too much power. They divided the power, but the party system puts all that power in different branches of the same Leviathan. They've made an end run, and because there's only two parties, if there were 10 parties, it wouldn't be so bad, but because there's two, it's completely short-circuited. The states are rubber stamps for what their feds want, because the feds and the states, they're all part of the same club. But never mind that. They don't have to make the state legislators do it. The state legislatures don't have to do this. They could call a convention. They could say who the delegates of the convention are. And if some states really did buck it, Congress could simply do the same thing with the call to convention that they did with the so-called Affordable Care Act. The same thing they did with Obamacare, they could do with this convention. That is, you think about what they did with Obamacare. If a state government refused to set up their own healthcare exchange, the feds set one up for them, didn't they? Any states who fail to set up a proper ratifying convention will just have one set up for them by the establishment. All they have to do is write it like they did Obamacare. They've done it before. And would this be outrageous? Would this be improper? Would this be illegal? I think so. Just like all their other improper and illegal actions that they're getting away with. And yet, once it's done, they're going to have the Constitution they want, and you will be the one breaking it. Now, I am sorry to bring this bad news. I am sorry to be, I don't want to be a hope crusher. I want people to be hopeful. And when you are basing your hope on the truth, you can be hopeful for real, and it'll stick. And so that's what I want us to do. I want us to conform to reality on this issue and on other issues, and then we can be hopeful. Because our hope is based on the truth. It's based on reality, and it will be effective instead of losing all the time. Anyway, I do thank you for listening. I'm sorry if I was a little over-emphatic on some of this. I do think it's important. God bless you.